Thank you all for joining and listening to this membership call with Sunitha from Vibrant Practice. Sunitha is somebody I've known for about a year now, and we've been working together on a few things related to Vibrant Practice. One of the reasons I'm excited to have Sunitha talk to us is because she brings a valuable perspective on how AI can shape medical practice. Because I think she is one of very few people, at least right now, who actually are building things that clinicians are using in their day to day. In other words, this is not like some prompts that you can use on the side or some tips on how you can make your workflow more efficient, but this is actually a piece of software with AI embedded into it. And that is her EHR Vibrant Practice. She has accumulated wisdom about how AI can drive efficiency and benefit in clinical practice. And I think also just has a really valuable perspective on where AI sits within healthcare, given her background, previously working at Meta, product leader in their AI products, and now building a technology product in the space. I'm happy to have you join me today. I always like to ask people if there's anything you want to add to everything I just said. Hopefully, it was not too off, but yeah, welcome, Sunitha, and thank you so much for joining.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, great to be on. Exciting to see Dr. Dybel in the audience, who I think found us through you, which is cool. And he's actually one of the most active users on Vibrant these days. Lots of learning from that collaboration, which has been great. Thank you for the great intro. I just want to preface by saying I am not a clinician, but I am a technologist. One of the things I love bringing into what I build and how we build things is a real sense of empathy and talking to a lot of the different providers. I talk to hundreds of providers who we're showing Vibrant to and getting feedback from, and now the cohort who's using us. One of the things I want to bring to this lens is my observations across all these different conversations and feedback. And we've been working on a newsletter and a series where I've been diving in with clinicians, many of whom are not using Vibrant, just generally like how they are using AI in their clinical practice. I think the most exciting thing is this is all happening so fast. Interesting to see the different ways people are using all sorts of tools in their practice, and Vibrant being one of those. But today I want to also make sure we're talking just more broadly about how you can find value with AI and different kinds of AI. So that's a bit of background.
I think that's a great segue into my first question, which is you mentioned you've spoken to a bunch of physicians who are using AI in their clinical practice. Tell us about some really cool examples that you've heard and seen that might be of interest to this group. If it's possible, are there any anti-patterns that you see some clinicians you don't want to specifically name, but any kind of anti-patterns that you also want to call out?
Yeah, I think there are two things I want to hit on maybe through our conversation today. One is what are the examples of what we're seeing in workflows? And then two is what are the emerging competencies or skills that you can start to think of as a clinician and incorporating, and just all of us, even as people using AI in our lives, how do you think about the competency that we need to develop of how to use AI? So those are two things I'll try to make sure we hit through our conversation. Going back to the first question, what are people using and what are maybe some anti-patterns? I think one of the biggest things, which is obvious now that so many of us are using tools like ChatGPT or Claude in our daily life, it's how can I bring this into what I'm doing to reduce friction across any parts of my workflow? When we think about friction, especially in clinical workflows, it can just mean anything that's adding time to the process of getting to answers or getting to clarity faster. Think about all the ways in how technology has been built. A lot of that friction comes from using technology today because you're cognitively switching between things, or it takes like 10 clicks to get something done. What are ways that we can think about speeding up friction? I think is the most interesting thing. That's one thing, reducing friction. And then the other thing is deep personalization. Instead of taking hours creating handwritten reports for your patients, you can actually now, with the help of AI, I guess that is a bit of, if you go back to the point of friction, that's taking out a lot of time spent on coming up with a certain output. But I think you can get even more. It's not just friction, it's actually getting better than you were able to do before with the help of personalizing. You might have context about this patient stored in different places across the record, across information coming in, and you can actually turn around and use that and get to a much more nuanced understanding. So I'll start with one example of the first of reducing friction in your workflows. I think some very obvious ones are using summarization tools to help you understand and pull information across a patient's record and then turn that into pre-charting for prepping so that you're not spending time like 20 minutes digging in on their lab results. Instead, you can use a tool, whether that's ChatGPT, Vibrant, or something else, to help you synthesize across results and prep for that visit much faster. We are seeing one clinic we are hopefully bringing on to Vibrant soon. They're very well known functional medicine clinic. They actually have this really long process. A patient fills out 20-page long intake form, right? And then staff manually reviews that, schedules an hour-long visit with an MA, dig in on the details of that intake form and fill in any questions. Then the staff takes that first form plus the second intake appointment and synthesizes that by hand and sends that to the clinician before the clinician even has their visit. That's 2 hours of the patient's time, maybe 2 hours of staff time. This clinic has already, just with the help of ChatGPT, actually turned that on its head and started to do a process where they're incorporating some of that information from the intake into a summary, having a 15-minute follow-up call to get to any questions, and then turning that around. I think that's one great example of reducing friction, getting to things faster. So that's one. And then the personalization front, I think one of my favorite examples is a clinician I spoke to at the Mankato Clinic in Minnesota who likes to use Gamma to create his own personalized presentations. Gamma is a tool where you can use AI to help build presentations or slideshows a lot faster. He is in a traditional clinic setting, but he uses Gamma as one of his patient interaction tools to create really helpful educational materials, personalized materials. And now it's thinking about like, how are you engaging people more than just like giving them a handout, right? I think those are two of my favorite examples. I'll pause there and then I can get to the anti-examples, but any questions on those?
I love those. Let me respond to a couple things you said. The first thing is around what kind of value are you looking to drive? I love the two examples you brought up around minimizing screen transitions and friction and also trying to improve output essentially.
Yeah.
I think the first point gets overlooked a little bit, especially now with AI. There's so much focus on the AI models themselves and how good the responses are that to some extent user experience design has gone to the wayside in some ways. When in fact, very important, especially when you're building tools for people who are very busy and doing lots of context switching by default, not application induced context switching, just context switching that comes with the job. You will have multiple patients to see, patients calling, and all sorts of things naturally coming. So if you have a tool that is now making you just to prescribe a medication for one patient need to like go through three different windows or screens or whatever, that is even more. That it all compounds.
Yeah.
I know you know Andrew, the founder of Canvas,
Right.
something he was very conscious of from the beginning when he started Canvas almost 12 years ago. They measured the number of like screen transitions and had that be like almost like a KPI for them at one
Yeah.
point. In response to the examples you shared, like I really love the example with Gamma because I think that really demonstrates how these tools can help us think, as you put it, just new ways of engaging people, right? Like we don't have to use AI just to make things work better in the containers that we have right now, which are EHR and patient portal.
Yeah.
We can create entirely new ones because now
Yeah.
we have the wherewithal and means to do it. I love that example.
That's exactly it. One more that comes to mind on this personalization front. I think there's some really interesting possibilities. There's one clinic I met recently that's using AI generated avatars in follow-up messages, right, to their patients. And I'm going to be testing out a company that does this soon. And part of some of the things that we do as a company is content. It's actually a great use case for follow-up information from a doctor.
Curious how that's going. Are you guys using HeyGen or something?
We're actually testing out Yuzu Labs. I don't know if you've heard of them, but they're like a more recent one. And they're interesting and really excited to partner with people. They take high production quality videos of you and you can give it any script and it turns it into a nice little specific follow-up video that you could send out post-patient visits. Now, one of the things that doesn't work well with some of these videos is expressiveness. So they don't work well when you're doing like social media content. As a result, they look uncanny and weird. But if it's just a factual follow-up that doesn't need a lot of facial expression, it's actually a pretty good use case. And that I've actually been playing around with it. I've been very surprised at how good the videos are. Those are things that I'm sure are just going to get better and better and provide a way to extend your capacity to really personalize. How are you getting through to patients in a way that meets them where they are, that is convenient? How are you thinking more any consumer company in that way? I think that's one of the ways, especially in longevity medicine, that it's helpful to think about ways that you engage your patients as really consumers. I think there'll be some interesting evolutions there that are coming soon.
Yeah. I want to get into a conversation about how we think, and I don't think anyone knows for sure, but I'm thinking about the example you just shared of the AI generated avatar. And there's no doubt that these things will continue to get better and better, almost to the point where it will be indistinguishable to most people. I wonder how that makes people feel. There's been a few studies that have been done that showed different types of sentiment about how people feel about their clinicians using AI and that sort of thing. But I'm curious, like, how you think about this, because you could see how people might experience videos like this and feel like the doctor is doing this out of convenience. This feels mass
Right.
produced. It's not. And so I'm just curious, like, how are you thinking about that? And how do you wrap your head around it?
Yeah.
Curious to get your
Yeah.
thoughts on that.
Great questions. I think this comes back to what are some of the anti-patterns or things to be aware of and be vigilant about. I think the first one is ways that you're decreasing human touch points in the process with a patient. That's where there's some risk. There's opportunity, but also risk. And I think to be honest, what we're going to see is over time more of an evolution of all of us as just people getting more comfortable with AI kind of touch points and expecting it. But I also think the usefulness of and the value of those human touch points is going to matter even more. I think there will be ways where it makes sense to leverage AI responses or these kinds of AI videos. But if that's all you're doing and that's how everyone is interacting with you, I think many people may lose trust or value out of that relationship. So it's about finding the right leverage points, I think, of when to use things like that. In this use case of a video, if you have course material, if you have a program for patients around metabolic health, instead of you having to record all of these videos, you could use this format of more AI generated content to help you with that and to save time, save money, and still create like a very custom experience for your patients on that. Or maybe even some of these follow up from a visit, like an after visit summary that includes a video or something like that. But if it's a person interacting with an avatar version of you to get the bulk of their care, I can imagine how that starts to lose that importance of human touch. And so I think navigating that and figuring out where you have to be more aware of losing that. So I think that's one thing just to keep in mind of don't lose the authenticity, maybe to just boil it down. Like where are the places that authenticity matters most in your patient journey and in the process? And how can you make sure that you really bring those to life and you really like those are moments that you really capitalize on. Yeah, this is a human giving you that kind of care and touch, things only humans can do.
Yeah, I think it's very well said. I'm curious because I bet a lot of the people who are listening to this are going to wonder, yes, I do not want to have content that's inauthentic. Can you share some examples, obviously without naming names, of where somebody used AI in clinical practice and it did come off as authentic? Because sometimes it is equally important to know what bad looks like as much as it is to know what good looks like. If you can't answer, that's fine.
You know, I have great examples of that yet. I think the anti pattern is doing things where you don't have deep knowledge around it, but you're saying you're going off of something that you quickly grokked on AI. And so I think that is something you can see through quickly. If you're missing errors or not proofreading, using AI to draft something for you, I think that's one of the most common things happening now. People getting lazy and lacking when you're actually, I think this happens a lot across the board. But as we are using AI to write for us more and more, it lacks a certain tone often if you haven't really made it your own yet. Or even if you have, if you don't proofread, add things, you can quickly tell when something doesn't have that human touch anymore. I think the more nuanced anti pattern is the lack of a human in the loop kind of review and read through to it's not only proofreading but also giving it a tone that makes it feel really personal. And so there are ways you can really work with AI to get to that tone if you keep guiding it and you're working with tools that allow you to do that. I think that's probably one of the more like nuanced challenges right now, where we often now are just seeing AI drafts to AI drafts communicating with each other, and it starts to lose the depth. And I think that goes to the last risk, which is I was talking with a clinician yesterday about her fear of brain rot as AI becomes more of a support around clinical decision support and tools. The idea that you stop thinking as a clinician is very unlikely. I think there's much more now that can help you push faster and deeper and unlock insights or questions or a depth of investigation to get there much faster. It requires you to really understand, why is AI responding to me this way, sense checking it, and to add a step in your cognitive process about being vigilant about reviewing what you think is coming back to you from AI. I think a thought pattern we all have to use as AI becomes more prevalent in our life is just really verifying, validating, sense checking. Is this like what makes sense with my gut and what makes sense with the thought process that I go with? And if not, oh, should I adjust that? Or is this because AI is wrong? And thinking about this iterative process now of using AI in your work.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I know you didn't, I think you actually did give some examples, but I will give one very specific example.
Yeah.
I'd be curious to get your thoughts. I think you implicitly mentioned it, but I do think, and I think this tends not to happen so much in patient or provider to provider communication. For example, some of the groups that I'm in where doctors are talking about medicine, where people will just like, I call it slop, right? Where they
Yeah.
will just put something to ChatGPT and they will just paste what ChatGPT said
Yeah.
about a given
Yeah.
question. And it's just like this long, like wall of text that they're just putting it there. And my thought is, I apologize if anyone listening to this eventually has done that. I don't think there's anything wrong with it, but let me explain how some people might receive it. One is, do you not think that we couldn't also do that? It's the inverse of the let me Google that for you meme, where somebody would ask a question and the obvious thing to do next is just Google it. And so this is like the inverse, where people have basically done the ChatGPT for you in response to a question. AI tools are best used when you ask the questions the right way and in a way that matters to you. It helps get at the nuance that you want. Versus if you just prompt it in a really generic way. One thing I wonder about is, and I think this kind of gets to like the laziness thing, is like, how often are people actually reading everything that it wrote?
Yeah.
And like you said, sense checking it and even taking care of very basic things. I have seen, not in like real practice, but we were testing things with a couple of clients. Sometimes ChatGPT will not, unless you change the instructions, always preface the reply with, hey, here's your reply about, here's my thoughts about this. And clearly that should be omitted. But
Exactly.
I've
Some people
seen that
forget
kind of
that and
be
copy and paste.
produced in the end
Yeah.
outputs. I think some of this is just hygiene and that sort of thing. The first one is the thing that I'm a little bit more concerned about. The concern about brain rot, right? It's a very real concern. We have to be thinking of AI as a tool for us, not just to save us time, but actually to help us ask even more questions and even better questions. And if
Exactly.
we do that, it can be a tool that actually elevates us. But it does require you to have that intention. You have to have that intention. If it's just helping you do what you were already doing, then I actually do think it results in brain rot.
Yeah.
So do think
Yeah.
at some point you're not doing something that you're doing before. So now what are you doing? Right? So
Yeah.
so you have to use it to
Yeah.
do something more. So that's my 2 cents on that.
I think AI is really going to be so powerful at amplifying expertise, because when you put it in the hands of experts, which is all of you clinicians here, you're able to now ask more of it with you're basically just extending your brain and putting in parallel track like 10 different thought processes that you might have now at the same time and kind of digging deeper. But if you give that same goal to somebody, even myself, who's not a clinician, and I were to try to understand and unpack maybe some situation that you're dealing with a patient, I wouldn't get to the same place because I just don't know what to ask. And it is, I think, an amplifier of expertise. And it does raise the floor of what's possible, right? It gives everybody now a baseline of things, but it's really supercharges, I think, the expert in becoming even more powerful.
Yeah. I think so much of this ultimately comes down to, and it's amazing how this mirrors, like lately I've been doing some reading of some Buddhist texts. And one thing they emphasize is the power of the question and asking the right question, and how
Cool.
that is foundational to understanding how to live a better life. And I think in a way that's actually also true for how to get the most use out of this emergent technology, which is AI, which is how you have to ask it the right questions.
Yeah.
You have to, knowing what questions to ask is paramount. I don't see, on some level, there will always be that need for someone to ask the right question. I don't think AIs will, this gets into a really meta discussion, but I do think there is always the need for somebody to ask the question that then drives the inquiry and kind of the pursuit.
But then layer on top of that, it's also only as good as the information it has. I think that's where tools like Vibrant can get really interesting. Our goal with building Vibrant is to build this excellent layer of context around a patient, which is really hard to keep on any platform right now. It's lives scattered across many places. But if you have this excellent layer of context and then you pair that with AI as a clinician, you have all of this at your fingertips, but you're able to parse through it and understand and get to conclusions faster. That's really what we think is possible. So I think today some of the opportunities are you can collect and aggregate information from a bunch of different sources, but it can be challenging and onerous to do this just with a tool like ChatGPT or all the other things out there, which is why we're trying to put that piece more on autopilot with a tool like Vibrant, where it's automatically adding all these things. We don't yet have things like wearables. We're actually working on that. We push that to make space for a few other things to make sure our practices are successful. Our goal, especially as we're looking into the end of this year, beginning of next, is to be adding in a lot more context in a streamlined way across a patient and being able to have a layer of intelligence that's helping providers make sense of that so that it's not just a bunch of dashboards and overwhelm with information, but it's actually helping you parse through. And then with that, you can what questions to ask of all of this context that you have.
Yeah, I love that. I'm curious to get your thoughts on this. One thing that is becoming very apparent is that AI is enabling one of its strongest vectors of acceleration and improvement with respect to software development and building products. There is, some would argue, like line of sight to where people can build entire applications with far less technical expertise than would have been required, to the point where you could even imagine individual physicians being able to do it. I know we use the term vibe coding right now.
Yeah.
There are definitely holes with how these things work now, but if you think about where this is all going, what do you think about the potential scenario where clinicians can create their own software? In that universe, like how does Vibrant support, or how do really EHRs that are initially starting off as conventional SaaS products, like software as a service for people who don't know, how are you guys thinking about riding that evolution? And as more power becomes available to the end customer, how do you think about evolving?
Yeah, I think the real kind of the reason why you might want to vibe code something is because you want it a certain way. You want it to do a certain thing, look a certain way. You're not happy with what's out there. I think that is more like an experience and front end in development terms, like question. And then there is a lot around the back end that just is not anytime soon going to be solved by vibe coding. All the connecting into the real world of lab ordering challenges with Quest and all the stuff that actually just moves in the world of bits or atoms, sorry, is where there are limits. And that does require sophisticated technology, but also just operational lift to make sure there are things happening in the background or we can follow up on things. And so I think that's where, unfortunately, a lot of challenges exist in medical ops and medical tech. We're seeing a lot of that. Sun and Dr. Dybel both have seen some of this too. One of our biggest challenges the last couple of months has been making sure lab ordering infra, which is we're working through a partner to deliver a lot of it, but that it's working as we want it to and as smooth as it needs to be. Some of that just isn't technology. It's challenges of how the ops flow works. When you think of prescribing, lab ordering, anything that's tapping into imaging, all of these different kinds of connecting points complete a circle of care. A lot of that is operationally very complex. And I think for that reason, it's hard to code solutions on top of it to address the perfect setup. But what we can do is allow for all of that context layer to exist? Can we aggregate all of these connecting points? Can we aggregate all of the ways that we might have data about a patient and then allow you to figure out how you want that to look, what you want the patient experience to look like, more customizations on what your front end and what the patient's front end look like? I definitely think I can see that being where we enable you to bring what you need to support your practice.
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot of truth to what you just said. And I think as much as we can, predict and be excited about the future, we have to do things today. And I think that there is a lot of complexity to how healthcare transactions happen.
Yeah.
Some of these companies are using programming languages from the 80s or 70s. The change does not happen overnight. I also think it's interesting to think about how, for the parts of the experience that are customizable, someone like Vibrant or any kind of software provider can help the physician do that. Right now, for the most part, most EHRs, including yours, are fairly set. There
Yeah.
is some customization, like you can change different things on a dashboard and stuff like that. But as the capabilities to have more flexibility in software extend, I could see, and I'm excited about the prospect of groups like yours making it possible for physicians to do that. That ultimately sits on top of this foundation that you alluded to earlier that's quite unsexy but important.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see, to be honest. I'm curious how much customizations are necessary or helpful versus kind of things on the margins of just, I like to see the information laid out in a certain way. I think we'll learn more and more, and it depends on the size and scale of different practices. But what we're actually seeing is a lot of people have very consistent needs across smaller practices that are doing longevity, functional, integrative, like even across all of those different things, which sound like different camps philosophically. I am personally finding, and maybe this is where my naivete as a non-clinician can be beneficial, is I see a lot of similarities, right, across like what is the core thing that each of these types of providers are actually trying to do. It's like working with data, personalizing in a more holistic way. There's a few different connector points that you might use more or less in certain types of practices. Maybe one is more supplement heavy, maybe one is more compounding heavy. These are differences in kind of philosophy of care. The piping and structure of it actually is quite similar. It's interesting to think about what are the pieces that need to be customized and how to not overwhelm, because I do think there are tools out there, and Canvas is a great example where it's very powerful, it's very customizable, but it's overwhelming to use unless you have a dev team or a lot of time to invest in figuring out how you want this exactly to work. So, how could we balance these things and make it easy if you are going the customizable route to do what you need it to do?
Said, I think the trade-off between customizability, putting my former product manager hat on, people don't always know what they want. And sometimes just because they ask for something doesn't mean it's what they actually need. What they
Yeah,
ask for and what they need can be two very different things sometimes.
exactly.
I think that that's the challenge. That's the endless challenge of building products, which again is one of those things that I don't think is going to go away. Like we can have AI that can build us anything under the sun, but we still need to know what to build. That will always require some level of judgment.
Exactly. The judgment and the taste. I don't see everybody all of a sudden being able to vibe code what they need, because if you do that today and you play around with these tools, you get a usable thing back. It doesn't usually look that good, doesn't usually work exactly as you need it to. And all of that, it seems like it's the last 10%, but it really makes 80% of difference on a product. And so I think that's where, same case with doctors who are using AI, it really is about a sense of taste and judgment in how you use these tools and what you're able to do with them. And I think we can't assume that everybody has that level of taste and judgment.
That's not what people signed up to do in many respects,
Yeah,
right? That's
exactly.
very so we are at the quarter till. I know there's some people who have joined who may have questions. I want to open it up to anyone who has a question. Feel free to ask it. Nason made a really good comment about the idea of AI empowering and seeing as an extender of capability. I think he's plus oneing us on that, which is awesome. But if anyone here wants to ask a question, let me know. I can just mention in the chat, I can either allow you to talk or you can just ask the question in the chat and we can answer it. Uh,
Yeah.
while we're waiting for people to do that, tell us a little bit about where you see the capabilities of EHRs evolving in the next year? Let's have a limited time horizon where we can have some line of sight into where AI models are going to go. What are some of the new things that might become possible in the next year?
Yeah, I think what is going to become possible in the next year will be more streamlining of getting to answers faster. We've thought about it as agentic workflows. I think I'm actually less bullish on how quickly great agents are going to make a difference in EHR workflows today. We have like little agents doing things on the sides, but like a fully agentic, do this for me. I have this patient, I need all these things to be done. One of the biggest learnings that I think we're having is the interesting challenge accuracy in these workflows. If you don't pass a fully perfect order through, and it's missing some information and you hit some error along the way before a patient actually has to put it through. I think we're going to see a lot of those kinds of errors increase if we move too quickly to agentic work. Across the board, a lot of people are finding this. I've heard this from people using tools like Sully or other AI agent platforms. The quality of it is actually quite low right now. I think it'll continue to improve, but some of this comes back to translating things into the real world of atoms versus just bits. If you don't have something written this way, it doesn't get passed through to the pharmacy for it to be filled this other way. And this pharmacy needs something different than that pharmacy. There's all these nuances that pop up in workflows. I'm tempering my excitement. I still have a lot of excitement. We're still building a lot around agents, but there's still a level of correction and catching and understanding the error rates and how to reduce those error rates that we're just trying to do a lot of work around. That's one thing. And then I'm seeing a few other questions here. Dr. Dybel, great to see you. I'm happy to switch to answering these.
Go ahead.
What excited you the most, and what things do you think we should be cautious about? I think what excites me the most is the ability to look across a lot of context, not only on a patient, but also what open evidence is showing is possible, what we're trying to do at Vibrant with clinical decision support, giving those tools to work faster around a patient. I also think even ways that you could leverage AI in chats with a patient. Maybe it's you, a patient, and AI all in a chat so you can see what a patient might be asking. There's a lot of opportunity for AI to be that first line of questioning that can save time from your staff and your team. And just knowing where to draw the lines around that will be interesting. I don't think everybody wants that necessarily. Some of you have practices where your clientele are really high end and would not want to deal with an AI. So I think it's understanding that line. I think what to be cautious about is any company out there pitching a lot of great agentic stuff right now, double click on it a lot to figure out how does it actually work? How much time does it take to set up? How do you know it's going to be accurate and all of this? Because I think there's a lot of people out there pitching on Instagram and things that are not real technical, to be honest. And there's a lot of noise in the market. And so I think that's where I would be cautious right now. I do think more agentic work is coming, and there's so much I would recommend you guys all test out things like I know, Anant, you use MCPs and different connectors that you can use through Claude or through OpenAI and test those out in ways that are safe and not compromising HIPAA or needs of your practice. But I use it a lot in my personal life, and that informs how I can use it in professional life. I recommend continuing to understand what's possible, how quickly things are changing in terms of capabilities. Cool. Not sure to discuss. What's your take on client-facing dashboards being built into current EMRs, or do those exist already? From Paul. I think in terms of client-facing dashboards, there's a range of types of work we're seeing. I think in there are, I don't know, Anant, if you have any thoughts on more specifically what kinds of dashboards Paul might be asking about, or Paul, if you want to share a little bit more.
Yeah, I think, and Paul, you should feel free to jump in and I can even
Like heads up, sure.
I'll allow you to talk. But basically like heads up. Yeah, so like heads up health and biocanic. And I think that these are basically platforms that are less focused on the EHR side and more focused on just the data aggregation and display
Yeah.
side.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's an important piece of this context about a patient that you need to bring into the picture of care. I think our personal opinion coming from Vibrant is like we are adding a lot of this into the EMR. Like they shouldn't be living in all these separate places. And so this is all context. One, you have one patient and one picture of that patient that should exist. It shouldn't have to exist in different places. And I recognize why these companies exist because they were built like 5, 10 years ago when no EHRs were starting to do this. I don't know that will any of the existing EHRs take all of this on, but I do think if you're building a company like Vibrant today, one of the precursors is this shouldn't live in 5 different places. It should all live in one place, which is our philosophy. Plans for something like this. Dr. Geibel, in a couple of months, I'm launching an easy to use tool to design your PDF for biomarkers. It will pull biomarkers. Yes, 100% plans for something like this. This is exactly a tool that we're thinking of as well, which makes a lot of sense. It's one of the top things that we get requested because a lot of providers who are running practices like yours or longevity practices, it's a great thing to give your patients a takeaway of some sort that's physical that they can work with. There are companies like Wild Health that pioneered starting to do some of this. More and more of an expectation, even from patients, right? To have something that I can really digest all this information. There are tools now that make it a lot faster and easier that we can use to populate it. From Rena, do you have an example of a clinical decision support tool that is being used in Vibrant? Yeah, so we actually have our own tool that is built into Vibrant. Within each patient's chart, there is an AI chat that is drawing on the totality of the patient's record, as well as a knowledge base that we have built around functional, integrative, and longevity protocols. So it actually is less tuned to traditional allopathic medicine if you compare it to open evidence, but it is still referencing peer-reviewed research. It's just a different lens. One of the things I think we'll see more of, and I'm talking to people who are training integrative clinicians, who are training functional medicine clinicians. There's, I think, the importance of capturing the specific philosophy that you want to practice with and being able to have AI come back with that sort of thought process is going to be more interesting. We are building a way in Vibrant for you to essentially add your own knowledge base in addition to what we have to be able to draw from that as you use AI in your practice.
Let me add a couple thoughts on something you mentioned before about agents. I completely agree. In case people don't know what we're talking about when it comes to agents, because it can all seem confusing, right? What is AI? What is agents? What are large language models? What are MCP and all these things? I think like one helpful way to think about agents is to imagine if the large language model, like i.e. ChatGPT or Claude or whatever, could start doing things that are beyond your explicit request. Like right now, what it does in ChatGPT is it just tries to predict what text you should get, which is basically it's looking at its accumulated corpus of knowledge, which is the whole internet, basically. But this whole internet doesn't include a lot of other information, context about you. And so the idea is with agents, you can ask the agent a question, then you give agents these different tools, right? Like you can check my email, you can check Slack, you can do deep research, and so on. And so in theory, it has this really cool concept where it's like, oh, that'd be amazing. Not only can it research itself from its own native LLM capacity, but it can also check all these other context sources. And this is where things like MCP servers come in, to enable agents to do what they're doing. Now, the issue, and I 100% like, as I've built some of these products, and I see the same issues where like these independent tool calls do not happen consistently, right?
Yeah.
And if you give the AI these extreme degrees of freedom, which is what you're doing with agents, it's like this additional layer of freedom, you remove a predictability in what's going to happen. Because like sometimes it will remember to call deep research, sometimes it won't, sometimes it'll decide to do something else. And it's just there's too much freedom, I think,
Yeah.
for where things are now. This kind of brings up the other point I just want to mention before we conclude here is that sometimes the best solution is not to build something with AI. Sometimes just a good old-fashioned algorithm that's written in regular code is
Yeah.
actually the best way to do it. Because with AI, you're basically getting probabilistic software. You can't always predict what it's going to do. Many
Mm-mm.
times that's good because you want variability, but sometimes you want something to be done the same way every time.
Yeah.
You probably shouldn't use AI for that. You should just write a function for it.
Machine learning is a kind of AI, but generative AI specifically is exactly what you described, which is generating some new prediction on what this output should be. It might not always come up with the same thing every time. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
So I know we're at time here, so I want to be respectful to your time, certainly, Sunita, as well as everyone else who's tuned in. Thank you so much. This is a lot of fun. I always enjoy having these conversations with you.
Same. Thanks so much for having me. It's great. I love this community. Some great Vibrant clinicians who I think have even learned about Vibrant through you. I really love the way you're growing this community and on the topics you're bringing in. So thanks for having me.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being on, and have a great weekend, everyone. Till next time.
Yeah.
Bye.